We're in Bereshit 11, and we're taking it slow. I mean, we're going to take this Tower of Babel story a little piece at a time, because there's a whole lot of good practical life lessons that we can learn from this. And this particular study tonight has got a whole bunch of questions that we can add to our toolbox of questions to ask ourselves. We've been considering the spiritual side of things, and tonight, this particular study is going to kind of make us look at the physical side of things, what we do, why do we do what we do, and considering things that we need to think about before we take action to do the things that we do. So we'll talk to our Elohim, and then we'll jump into our study. Master Yehovah, we thank you for this opportunity to study your word. We ask that you'll open our eyes, open our ears, and our hearts, so that in gaining this knowledge, we'll be able to build wisdom, that through our understanding we can touch the world in a positive way. And we thank you for it all in the name of Yeshua. Amen. Okay. So, as I said, in our studies, we've been considering the spiritual side of our self-examination over this time of the Omer. This study is just verse 3 of Bereshit 11. And we're going to take more of a look at our physical side and what motivates us to do certain things and take certain actions. Because when we ask, where am I? It's not only to see where our spiritual state is at, but also we need to take time to say, where am I in considering where our physical things that we're doing, what is that doing? So within this study, like I said, we're going to generate a whole bunch of questions that we can add to our list of other questions that we can ask ourselves, not just during this counting of the Omer, but this is something that we can actually use anytime we're getting ready to make a big decision or take a particular project. So there's some good questions that we can learn from this. So last week we found out that the children of Israel had landed in the plain of Shinar, and they looked east. And so this week, verse 3 begins, and they said one to another, "Come, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly." And they had brick for stone, and slime had they for mortar. So the phrase, Vayomeru ish el re'ehu, if we read it in English, it just says, and they said one to another. So, like we usually do, let's take this word by word and let's kind of get an idea kind of beneath the surface of what we can take out of this phrase to apply to our life. And the word vayomer, or vayomeru, comes from the root amar, that it does mean to say, but it also means, amongst a list of other definitions, it means to speak one's heart, as well as to intend. We have intentions. This word also means to be boastful or prideful of oneself. So if we keep this idea in mind, and we consider what we recently discussed about Nimrod, Nimrod is a name that means rebellious. It means valiant, but it also means rebellious. He put himself before Elohim and was reverenced by others when it says that he was a mighty hunter before Yehovah. And it wasn't that Yehovah was looking down and saying, "Oh, look how great he is." It was that he was putting himself before Elohim, and he was accepting reverence that belonged perhaps to Elohim. So we've also called to mind the words of Elohim concerning the heart of man, that its imagination is evil from his youth. And we get that in Bereshit 8:21. After the ark is landed at Ararat, Noah makes a sacrifice, and Elohim smells the sweet aroma, and he makes this comment that the imagination of man is evil from his youth. And in in Jeremiah 17:9, Elohim says that the heart is deceitful above all things, and it is exceedingly weak. So we have a slight flaw in our system if we aren't, I guess, connected to our Elohim, if we don't take the time to connect and to pray about things before we get involved in them, and take the time to basically to have our relationship on the right grounds with our Elohim. So when we take a look at this next word, this is a word of interest in the letter 1. There's a number of ways to say one in Hebrew. The word used here is ish, that it can mean one after a really long list of definitions. It's, way on down the definition chain. The meaning of ish is first and primarily man. The root of ish is enosh. Enosh means mortal. And the root of enosh is anash, that means weak and frail. So these definitions, if we understand ourselves, that from what Elohim has said, that without our heart being attached to his heart, that it tends to be, evil is a word that's used but erroneous, not always right. And that if we consider also that it's in Jeremiah, he says the heart is deceitful above all things and exceedingly weak, then we understand from Enosh that means weak and frail, that there's a weakness there. But deceptive is that in this state of being weak and in this state of being prone to make errors, if we trust the heart, a lot of times it can lead us in a wrong direction. Now, it can lead us in the right direction a lot of times, but how do we know the difference? We take the time to communicate with our Elohim to be sure that we're going to do the right thing. So, ish. These definitions, if we put them all together, pose a question. Now, they're getting ready to build a tower. The question that we ask ourselves is, why do we find it necessary to build towers in our lives? Our answer is found perhaps in the balance of this phrase, which is el re'ehu, which means to another. The word el can mean to, but more specifically it means towards, as in the direction of something. But it can also mean against. The word re'ehu is used here for another, but also means friend, neighbor, and companion, and it also means fellow citizen. The root of this word is ra'ah, which means to graze, but it also means to keep friends or to make friends. And it can also have a more intrinsic meaning, in that it means to devour or to entreat evil. Okay, so what does entreat mean? Entreat, according to Webster's dictionary, means to ask in a serious and emotional manner, or it also means to try to persuade, as in asking for another chance. So there's emotion that's involved in this word entreat. Do we build towers in our lives based on the deception of our heart? Do we build them based on emotional things? So we have other questions here, that why do we find it necessary to build towers in our lives? We've asked that one. We can add other questions. Do I feel that I must impress someone? Is this a weakness if I feel I need to impress someone? People get themselves into a lot of trouble when they try to impress other people, but people do it all the time, and it's usually an impulse. Do I build a tower to persuade someone to see things my way? Am I seeking to influence friends and neighbors? Or am I seeking to make my mark on society as a whole? Are my motives for building this tower good, or will they do harm? We all get into things where we want, it's normal to want to make your mark on society. It's normal in our human state to want our friends to say, wow, you know, it's normal. We all do this, you know. But what are our motives for wanting to do this? Are they good? Are they bad? We'll talk about that in a minute. But we're going to consider something that the Lubavitcher Rebbe said, considering it was on the 43rd day of the Omer count. And then it was in Chesed Shebe Malkut, which is kindness and love in the kingdom. And we're going to consider what he said in order to kind of take a broader look at these questions. And what the Rebbe had to say was that the ancient philosophers divided the world into 4 realms, each real different from the other before it. The silent realm was the earth, rocks, water, and air. Said these do not leave their boundaries. The second realm was plants that grow beyond their boundaries. The third was the realm of animals that transverse their boundaries by their migration. And the last realm is that of man who reaches outside of himself with words and dialogue. So what does this have to do with our questions? Consider that the earth in itself really doesn't do anything. But a few months back I watched a video, and I think it was somewhere in the Ukraine, where there was a rock slide, and it was somebody actually filming the rock slide from the street that was falling down, and this village that this guy was filming this rock slide from is about to be just totally wiped out by this rock slide. So earth can move in a most destructive way. It doesn't just sit. Rocks can affect the course of rivers and streams, but also if their environment is disturbed, they can be extremely destructive in the form of rock slides. And we see, when we're traveling in the mountains, we see all these little signs that say, watch out for falling rocks. And they just fall. We've seen the majestic beauty of the Grand Canyon, that it was carved by ancient rivers over hundreds of thousands of years. And if you haven't been to the Grand Canyon, if you've ever seen photos of the Grand Canyon, it's incredible.
Yes.
That, you know, just imagine that much water. But we also consider the tranquility of quiet waters if we're out at a pond or at the lake. But we also have seen the destruction in here recently of what happens when there's a tsunami, which also, a tsunami is also caused by the earth moving. So they're not all that silent. We need air to breathe, but we've all seen the destructive forces of hurricanes and tornadoes and cyclones. Plants yield oxygen, and as such help life on the planet exist. Animals also provide a balance to life in our world. The decisions, however, made by man can alter the course of all of the above mentioned by his action. You cut down too many trees, you affect the oxygen level on the planet, you also affect the earth around that area, and that there's nothing to stop the earth from moving. So now you have something that causes landslides. You burrow through a mountain and move all this earth out of the way. Well, you destabilize the structure, you have rock slides. You cut down all the trees, like we were saying, you cause problems for the animals. The things that we do have consequences. And those are on a major scale, but we can scale that down into our life and say, have I really thought through what I want to do? In other words, have I thought through everything that I need to build this tower? What's the purpose of this tower? The towers that we build will ultimately influence the world around us. So it is of great importance to know what it is that motivates us. Based on the definitions of this first verse and what we've just considered, we can conclude that we must examine our intention before acting on them. Good intentions can harm others if we're not careful in paying attention to what we're about to do. So we're going to continue our look into this verse with the next phrase, Kaba ni lebenim, lebelim beniserefa, liserefa. Come, let us make brick and burn them thoroughly. It's interesting in that phrase that the words are used repeatedly. There's actually, for all of that that's being said, there's actually only 3 words being used specifically in that phrase to say anything. And they all mean the same thing. It's like, let's brick, brick, burn, burn. If we read that literally, it would, let's brick, brick, burn, burn. So, what does it mean? If we read the first part of this phrase, let us come make brick, literally it would say, if we take the definitions of these words, ascribe, kaba, to be pure, nilebenim, and to be ethical, lebelim. We have words for stone and we have word for brick that have primitive roots. One of them is to be pure and one of them is to be ethical. So, ascribe to be pure and to be ethical. The second part of this phrase, and burn them thoroughly, uses the same wording twice for the words burn, serefa, and thoroughly, liserefa. Both of these words mean to burn and to consume totally by fire. So what does this have to do with ascribing to be pure and to be ethical? If we take a look at the Proto-Hebrew of this, it tells us that it represents the strike of a serpent. The strike of a serpent. So if we think about a serpent, what does that bring us to mind? A snake. So what do we think about when we think about a snake, something that crawls on its belly? We start to think about the choice that we have in our perception of tet. You know, are my motives pure and ethical according to my relationship with Yahuwah my Elohim? Or are they based solely on my pride that I may boast, placing myself before Yahuwah? What are the motives for what I'm doing? You know, we've said that to reverence Elohim, and we think of reverencing Elohim as being all that big of a spiritual thing, but sometimes to reverence Elohim is actually physically acting out as being in the image and likeness of Elohim, seeking to do the right thing. Like Paul said in Philippians, he said, thinking about other people around us before we think about ourselves. He was using the example of Yeshua, that he humbled himself, that as the Word, he didn't have to become human, but he humbled himself to the point that he left that realm, took on flesh and blood, and humbled himself to the point of death for the well-being of those around him. So we think about the choices that we make. Are my motives pure and ethical according to my relationship with Yahuwah my Elohim, or are they based solely on my pride, that I may boast, placing myself before Yahuwah? According to Webster's, the word ascribe means to refer to a supposed cause, source, or author. So we add another question. What is my motive for building this tower? What am I ascribing that to? All right, turn the page. So this takes us back to the tet. Are my actions to love Yahuwah with all my heart, mind, and strength, or to love my neighbor as myself? Or do I satisfy my flesh and pride? Those are the things that we can ascribe our actions to. Is either we're doing them because it's the right thing to do according to the instruction of our Elohim that affects those around us in a positive way, or we're doing it simply out of pride because we need to satisfy a fleshly urge. Is there anything wrong with doing something out of pride just to simply satisfy satisfy a fleshly urge.